15 minutes for questions and discussion with the audience. Thank you. So, the sir in the second row.
Thank you very much. And my name is Rasmus Vincent. I come from a Danish company called Habitats who works with biodiversity. Thanks for inspiring presentation and your general very progressive work on environmental profit and loss. I'm curious to elaborate a little more about how you use all the data and insights that you get from your reports. Because to me it sounds very much like you're mostly using it for choosing between different suppliers and maybe not so much for pushing them or inspiring them for more sustainable methods. Can I ask you to elaborate a bit on that, please?
Absolutely, and I probably, in the interest of time, cut out a few things that might have been of interest. One thing we've looked at is chrome-free tanning. It's it's more of an innovation because leather tanning uses chrome, and it's not a good thing. Basically, there's all kinds of impacts from heavy metals in tanning. And although the process can be very efficient in, I'll say, pulling that back out and recycling it, from an industrial standpoint, ideally you don't use it at all. That's an area where we look at material innovation is another. Whether it's using plastic from, I'll say, polyester from recycled fish nets, or for using, we had an example with Reprieve, one of our brands, Volcom, uses for a lot of their product lines. So material innovation is a big, it's a driver and it's also a result, is looking at, okay, well, if this is a big impact, either how do we do it better? Sometimes it's on the ground innovation. It could be anything from grazing practices to when you're looking at cotton, even if it's organic, is it rain-fed versus like it's finding, you say, the right supplier, but it can be also the right place. But in the other case, it can be looking for alternatives or better ways to do it. Certainly, resources will get more and more scarce. There's no question about that. So we need to get smarter about how we do it. And this is one of the things that helps us get smarter about it.
Hans van Gossem, Arcadis. It's very impressive to see the insight you have in everything from store back to raw materials. But there's also the life after it's been bought in a store. Do you have insights into that, and what impacts are, and also potential solutions in terms of like circular economy, consumer behavior, and stuff like that?
That's another one of the innovations we looked at jointly. It's called Worn Again. Also, H&M is engaged in that. That's around closed-loop recycling of polyester and other organic fibers. It's basically where the technology to recreate a new, basically a new fleece jacket out of an old one. Still in process, but those are the kind of things, obviously, that are silver bullets when you can find those things. Consumer end of life, we did do a study. It gets very particular, interesting in terms of consumer behavior. And of course, consumers, there's so many different types of consumers in different markets. So we did work on that in the UK with one of our brands, and actually found the impacts were quite a bit less than the supply chain. So that's different than I think the original work on blue jeans, and I would probably challenge that now, because cotton, as we know, is very water intensive. It's very hungry for water, so you use a lot, and that's part of what we discovered through this process, is you really use a lot of resource to make the product. The answer is sort of it depends, and I think that's going to be a real interesting area to explore also with the Natural Capital Protocol as we get more and more insight into that. It's the most difficult information because it's easy to know where stuff comes from, but to know where it goes to relies heavily on consumer feedback, and getting quality information can be difficult. But it's a very, very interesting area, and we could get a very different answer in Finland. The consciousness of people around sustainability also is a big driver on habits and of use and end of life.
No? Over there? Or the lady? There was one more question before? Oh, okay. Then to the lady, please. And then you.
Hi, this is Sharon Brooks from UNEP WCMC in Cambridge. Thank you very much for an amazing presentation. It's great to see such good work. I only wish more companies could do that. My question, I think you've touched on it a little bit, but it's really about, in the context of the question that was raised earlier, like, so we do valuation, and then how, and importantly, how do companies respond to that? So how do they respond to what we find? And obviously, there's responding to risk, and in the context of supply chains, global supply chains, that's particularly interesting, because obviously one element is simply looking for alternative suppliers, looking for the better suppliers, maybe those that are doing it slightly better, and therefore, you're not necessarily going to get that transformational change because other retailers will source from the other suppliers. So I suppose it's really about how much investment, I suppose, goes into supporting existing suppliers and improving practices, as opposed to looking for alternatives to just changing suppliers. I mean, you touched on that just now, I think, in terms of as resources become scarcer, that becomes more of a necessity to actually invest in research and innovation. I just wonder if you could elaborate a bit further on that. Thank you.
I think there's a couple points there. One, I'd like to say about the valuation part. We have 150 plus years of industrialization where we haven't valued natural capital and hasn't worked so well. So maybe we can try it and to see if it helps, because it's certainly, we have nothing to lose at this point. I think also I can say, when you're talking to business people, if you talk about, this how many grams of greenhouse gases, how many liters of water, it has no meaning to them, because sometimes you can put it in scope, but it really is difficult. When you start talking about euro values, even if it is externalities, even if it is cost of society, it's a language they understand. And then you can actually start comparing different products without saying, well, this was better in water but worse in greenhouse gas, and comparing whether it's division, brands, companies. So for investors, that's very interesting. I think we're getting more and more interest from investors that want to understand not just about us, but in general, it's a way, I'll say a shadow way of understanding risk. Right now it's shadow because it's not yet mainstream. But I'll say the really smart investors are picking up on this. Because if a company doesn't understand where its stuff comes from and what the risk is associated with that and the impacts, you kind of wonder how well they're managing their business. So that's to the first part. Second part, there are organizations in our industry like Sustainable Apparel Coalition. I could probably rattle off a string of acronyms, but there's many in our industry that we're working with to try to incorporate this kind of thinking. And it is very true. When I take those examples, silk, cashmere, it's a concerted effort to ensure that there's a supply in 20, 50 years. So it does take industry collaboration, which is part of why the whole idea of open sourcing it, even though, yes, obviously there's a competitive advantage by doing it smarter, but we also, in our own self-interest, need to share this as much as possible. Not all companies have the same. I mean, we have leadership that we're a family-owned business, and to that we have a continuity, I'll say a vision that we don't, that you don't see in a lot of companies that are changing CEOs every 2 to 4 years. So that helps, but I think companies are realizing in our industry more and more, hopefully also because we're publishing things like EP&L, that it's really important that they understand their footprint and ways to work with their supply chain and consumers to better manage that.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions in the audience before 3 more. We have to put it briefly now because we are nearing lunch. One the sir over there, one a second one over there, and the lady over there. Yeah.
Yeah,
please put it briefly.
Yeah, Jani Holopainen, University of Helsinki. After hearing this morning's sessions, I really got the confirmation for our research results that the corporate social responsibility strategies are very much supplier-facing strategies currently, while as like the more, well, the other product attribute and service attributes are very much like a price and quality supplier, customer-facing. So my question is that, and a comment that why there's no more of these customer-facing strategies in terms of corporate social responsibility, and more importantly, these more modern, contemporary, outward-facing strategies which are applied by the digital application companies, and they've been very successful and effective with those communication strategies. So have you considered these? Actually, well, we have researched these different tools, and just like one point. These are so-called omnichannel community marketing and communication tools, and I wish you to take a look at those very effective tools currently in the global enterprises used. Thanks.
Okay, quick answer.
I think I'll answer that in reverse. To the second part, we're going to play more with those in the future. To the first, which is about digital and using that more effectively. To the first part, with luxury, the quality is inherent. I mean, that's what people, the dream of luxury is the quality that fits in with sustainability, and the products last. It's sort of inherent to our strategy, is that we believe sustainability is one of the key components to creating quality. So it does it's inherent to it. And I think that's an important thing. It's, when you look at disposable clothing versus long-lasting, of course there's other aspects that come into play there, and I won't neglect to acknowledge that. But it really is important, I think, that to deliver on the promise to consumers, because I think the bigger challenge is what people think they're getting and what they're actually getting is something different. And for us, it's important to make sure that they are getting what they think they're getting, and sustainability is a key part of that.
Thank you. Please.
I'll project my voice. Matt Smith, JTC UK. Brief question. Do you have any experience or views of how Earth's observation, or indeed advances in satellite technologies, are being used and can be better used in natural capital evaluation or also monitoring impact?
We're actually, I'll jump in, and then I'm sure there's some other, with Earth Genome is a project that's doing that. GIST is another. So those things are invaluable, because when you want ground level data about impacts and about climate change scenarios, it needs to be fed with data like that. And that's a lot easier to get than national university studies that take 3-4 years and then they get published and only some of the data so that stuff to me is invaluable to getting as close as you can to real-time systems and not backward facing actions.
Tom, would you like to add something to that? No. On the left. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anne Quashie from Aalto University. I do sustainable supply chain research, and I also found your presentation very interesting. And I wanted to ask about the part where you talked about using, for instance, welfare economics to look at like impacts on society. And I think your slides also mentioned like you're being interesting, like change in well-being. How well are you able to also take into consideration like the positive aspects of your, for instance, supply chain in for instance, looking at like silk production or cashmere production? Is that as easy to quantify as maybe the negative?
We're looking at profits, and that gets into discussion. We're actually going to be publishing a paper of profits to at least give our point of view on accounting for profits, because it's a P&L. Where you reset the baseline, it has to be an exceptional basis to avoid greenwashing and just to be clear. But where an ecosystem has been destroyed, and because the base of the EPNL is from a pristine ecosystem, what destruction has been done. But if it's been destroyed and you're arriving to it to improve it more than the natural rate, if it would naturally improve, to account for a profit. That's part one. Part two is there's a growing movement on, I'll say, social P&L, which is, I think, very important. But I advise caution that a company does not say, yes, we're destroying the environment, but look at all the jobs and benefits we're creating. Because to me, that's reflected in their profits. We just need to be careful with that, stretching the metaphor, and that companies don't make those claims. And I think we've seen that happen more and more in this space.
Yeah, so exactly. So we're looking into more and more projects where you look at what we call social human capital valuation, and it's very important, as Michael says, not to start netting those off. It's actually about maximising the beneficial aspects and minimising the negative. And one area that I think is getting towards what you're talking about is the CDP have started some momentum in this area, is this idea of asking companies around science-based targets. So accepting that on the environmental side there's likely to always be a negative impact, but more asking the question around, okay, I'm going to use some natural capital, but how much can I use within the carrying capacity of the local water basin or whatever, and operating within those limits, and looking at for example, at your growth projections over the next 5 years, and asking how much natural capital I'll need to achieve those versus how much I can use. Essentially moving from targets that are set against a relative baseline to targets that are set against an absolute one.
Thank you very much. Time for lunch has arrived and we've earned it, so we have to close this session now. Thank you very much to the audience for attending the session and asking their questions. And thank you very much for the excellent presentations, giving an overview of this very complex issue, which is very much in the flow.